right, welcome back to another episode of the Lookout Podcast. I'm joined by the legendary Rene Eustace. Thank you so much for being here, Rene. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it was kind of a last minute thing. I had to cancel those Idaho Fire Lookout folks, Kat and Billy. Man, I mean they're great folks, but it's gonna be over 100 degrees, and they didn't have an opening until I think around 5 o'clock or so, and that was gonna be way too hot for the Airstream.
It'll be boiling in here.
Man, it would be. Oh, I don't think my equipment would survive, or me. So
Yeah, a little warm. Warm.
So I appreciate you. I mean, it's last minute, and we got together here bright and early at Bell Crossing, right next to
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
Beautiful up here.
it's beautiful.
It's
yeah,
a good spot.
right next to the Bitterroot River.
Yep.
And then you had some other news that I wasn't even aware of this morning.
Well, I just reminded Luke that today is the anniversary in 1969 of the Apollo 11 landing on the moon.
Oh man.
And I don't remember if I mentioned this in one of our earlier podcasts that we did, but I was in Navy boot camp right now in 69.
Oh,
and our company commander, which is, I guess, the Navy version of a drill instructor, he wasn't going to let us listen. We had a radio in our barracks, and toward the end of the day, we had a period of like 2 hours where we could turn it on, and hear rock and roll music or whatever. And this was in the afternoon, and we knew that the landing was going to happen, and we wanted to listen to it. And he gave us all kinds of grief about it, and we threatened mutiny if he wouldn't let us listen to a historical event like that. Yeah. So he did.
Oh,
but
man,
yeah,
good on you guys.
yeah. I mean, it's like, come on, this is never going to happen again. The first landing on the moon, you got to let us listen to it. Okay. So he did.
Yeah, once in a lifetime. How was the feed? Did it come through pretty clear?
It was on the radio, but it was kind of okay. You couldn't really tell exactly when Neil Armstrong said one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was a little bit muffled, but I think it was the Walter Cronkite broadcast, and right after he said that, then he reiterated what he had said, and so, we were in a barracks building, and the acoustics weren't very good in there, and there was about like 60 of us in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was cool.
Man,
Still getting to listen to it. It was really neat.
Really cool. What a moment in time. I mean,
Yep.
yeah. No human had been on the moon at that point, and
yeah. And I'd watched the earlier stuff on our television at my mom's house when Apollo 8 circled the moon at Christmas time. I recorded the sound of all of that off the TV onto a reel-to-reel tape.
Whoa.
Nobody knew what they were going to say, but I kind of followed that mission because it was during Christmas vacation from college at that point in time. And so I would record excerpts of what Cronkite and others were saying about the mission, and then you could hear their transmissions back to Cape Canaveral and all that stuff. And then I recorded live that Christmas message when they talked about the good earth and all that. It was really cool.
Man.
So I still have those tapes and stuff. But
really?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that sometime. That'd
pretty
be
neat.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. And then my mom had some folks come and record, kind of do the same thing during the moon landing trip too. And I've never listened to that one, but yeah. It's pretty neat.
That is really neat. Oh man, that'd be
Yeah.
kind of interesting. So your mom recorded it then? You said?
She had some friends that knew how to work the tape recorder and stuff do it
Cool.
for me, and then surprise me with it when I got
Oh
out of
man,
boot camp and back home.
that's special. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, it was neat.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Good stuff.
really good stuff. I mean, just the timeline of your life so far. I mean, there's been a lot of historic events, man.
Yeah. And in 67, when my cousin Ron and I made that 2-month trip around the United States, we visited my uncle who worked at Cape Canaveral. He worked for Bendix. I might have said this in that earlier podcast too. He worked for Bendix, and Bendix was responsible for all of the oxygen systems in all the Apollo capsules and that kind of stuff. So Uncle Chet knew all of the astronauts and everything, and we didn't get to meet any of them, but he took us to the Cape and gave us like a private tour, and we got to go into the big vehicle assembly building, the big giant tracked vehicle that would roll the rockets
Yeah.
out onto the launch pad and stuff like that.
Oh, very cool.
It was really cool. So having had that connection with him being there and everything, it was neat, because
Yeah.
I knew where the Cape was and, all that good stuff. So
Yeah, not too many people get that experience either.
it was
Oh,
neat.
that's really neat, Rene. And
Yeah.
were they still stuffing the astronauts back in the Airstream for quarantine for a little bit?
Were they what?
Was that around the time when they put the astronauts in the Airstream and quarantined them for like a week or something?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just think of that because we're in an Airstream, so I'm like, oh, that's kind of relevant there too.
Yeah, I remember when they came when the all the Apollo astronauts I think that landed on the moon, after the first group, Armstrong and those guys, they all had to quarantine because nobody knew if there was some kind of a
Bacteria or something.
bacteria or
Back, right?
microbe or something in moon dust that would,
Wipe out the
come back
population.
and wipe out the Earth or something.
Oh man, what kind of scary time to not really know. Like we're gonna send some folks up there.
Stuff
and,
that had never been done before, and
yeah, not really know what the environment is up there and
didn't
and
know, had
gonna
no
react.
idea really.
And it's smart to quarantine because even like the stuff that we in our lives being in the Forest Service, the stuff that we've experienced, and not so much in our generation, but before us, like the example that I'm always talking about is the
Little
wormy chestnut.
skeeter
Oh,
flying
yeah,
around.
he's sniffing me, a little bugger. But like the American wormy chestnut, that was like this grand tree on the East Coast. For folks who don't know, it was like. Real similar to a sequoia tree. The size of them back in the day, and then the Asian chestnut tree came over with the Asian blight or something and wiped
Yeah.
them all out.
Yeah.
So it's, that's just on Earth, two different countries.
Right.
Not like having a disease that doesn't
That you don't know what to do anything about or whatever.
yeah. So
Yeah.
going to the moon and coming back. Makes sense to quarantine to make sure there's nothing hanging on to the astronauts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And all the moon rocks they brought back and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
Is there any? I wonder if there's any difference.
They've got some of them in the Smithsonian. I remember when we did the Capitol Christmas tree trip from the Bitterroot back there in
Oh, yeah.
'08. We had considerable time. We were only staying like 2 blocks from
the
the
Smithsonian.
Smithsonian. So of an evening after we'd meet up and eat dinner and stuff like that, I'd walk back over there and spend a lot of time
Yeah, I bet.
because it was so close and
Yeah.
it's free to go in the museums.
Oh.
It's one of our American rights is to be able to go in there and
Yeah.
so you could spend a lot of time in particular areas rather than quick trip, where you'd have to just breeze through the whole gigantic thing, which is huge.
Yeah, it's massive, huh?
Yeah,
Man.
so it's really cool.
And they don't even have everything on display, from what I've
Well, I
read.
think a lot of things are still in storage or they're fragile, and they
Yeah.
have to figure out if they're going to store them or exhibit them, how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
At the time we were back there, the original Star Spangled Banner was in this big controlled atmosphere room. They were doing some repairs and stuff to it.
Oh, whoa.
And it was a big flag.
Yeah.
And it was neat to get to see it.
That is really, really. How big are we talking? Like the size of this kind of back area?
Bigger than your Airstream, as I recall. Probably about this long, but wider.
Whoa.
It was big.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Man.
And it was all on this big giant table where they could, work on the fabric and this, that, and the other.
Dang.
Cool stuff.
Man, I probably had to make a couple people to make that flag then, huh?
I guess. I have no idea how
Imagine.
they do it or
Yeah, I have no idea.
how they
either.
did it back then.
Probably all hand sewn, right?
Yeah.
Man,
I'm
that-
sure. Yeah.
That is very cool. I'd love to see that. And man, there's so much history in DC. I don't really want to go because of how populated it is, but I do want to see all that stuff.
It's worth it just to be able to see that. The World War II memorial on the mall was pretty new then also.
Oh.
So it was cool getting to spend time down wandering around there. They had every state had a not a monument really, but a portion of it with the state flag and
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, very
it was-
cool.
it was neat.
Yeah, I've been doing a bunch of research for the Man Gulch Memorial that's coming up, the 75th anniversary of the tragedy.
Coming up here.
Yeah, August 5th.
Mhm.
And 10 of those young men killed by the Man Gulch fire were World War II veterans.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's a, man,
Yeah, there were a number of them, that's for sure.
Yeah, so World War II has been kind of on my brain lately because they all came from different branches of the military, and yeah, I mean there was one battle. This Navian was one of the fellows who got killed on Man Gulch, and he survived like one of the big battles of like I wish it's something with a B. I can't remember the name of it, but
Oh, probably Battle of the Bulge.
no,
Maybe
it was a land battle because Battle of the Bulge was water, wasn't it?
no, it
What
was. Yeah, the Bulge was the Germans had pushed out into this area,
Oh,
and the 101st Airborne and others were there, trying to stop that. It could have been that.
oh gosh, yeah, it could have been. It was yeah, and it may be because it was a town that he was in, and then the Allied forces, most of the U.S. got there early, and then they got surrounded, I think, by Germans.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the name of a town.
I think the story was that, or one of the stories was that a German commander asked the general in charge of the 101st to surrender, and if I'm remembering correctly, his reply was nuts.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, what a time! Holy cow!
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that Navian fella, he survived Man Gulch, and I guess he's because he had been in some pretty heavy combat. Even as things were starting to hit the fan, he was still walking around taking pictures and kind of cool as a cucumber. And then, they ended up catching him. But yeah, it was kind of tragedy that he survived that big battle and then came back to the U.S. And
Yeah.
I mean, only a few years later.
Have you been to Man Gulch?
Yeah, twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, once I was really, really young. One of my first memories of like a family hike. My dad took me and my brothers and my stepmom out there, and it was really, really hot. I mean, I don't think my dad could have picked a hotter day. And, I was kind of telling the story in the last podcast.
That's what I hear. That country is really warm, and
Man,
that day was really warm too.
yeah, I think it was a record high, and
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, and
And then you went again later.
yeah, and then I went again in 2013. But that first time I went in the early '90s, like '92 or '93. There was no fire, but there was a lot of the trees had been burned and never came back.
Right.
So it was, just grass mostly. And you lean over the edge of the gulch because we were on Rescue Gulch side we hiked in from. And you lean over looking into Man Gulch. It's really steep, as you know. And there's up valley winds were going because of the heat of the day. And you could feel it like hot air on your face. And even as a kid, I remember that distinctly. And it was like, man, it's a bad scene. And,
Wow.
I was in around some of the markers at that point because I think we were next to Hellman's because he made it out, but he went to the hospital. He just didn't make it after the hospital, and they
Right.
put his marker on the Rescue Gulch side, and so we were next to that his marker, and it's just like, whew, man, yeah, it was a bad scene.
Just think, it was just that hot normally from the high temperatures, let alone trying to run to escape a fire that's chasing you.
Yeah, I think Wag Dodge estimated like a 200-foot wall of flame behind them. I don't think it was like 200 foot tall, but like thick.
Length probably because of the steep slope.
Yeah. I mean, that's even today. I mean, that's kind of rare to see.
Yeah.
And but yeah, nuts to survive like something like that. I think get killed on a fire is a bad deal. And all those stories because we have Marvin L. Dick Sherman, so everyone called him Dick. So there's kind of in quotations in his name, but Marvin Sherman is buried in Darby, and we're doing the memorial for him on August 10th. And so if you're around, you should definitely check it out. But since he served, the veterans are going to have a color guard there, and then we're going to do a big memorial for him there at his gravesite.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
When are they going to do that?
On August 10th at 10 a.m. So anyone who's listening wants to attend, feel free. Yeah, it's open to the public.
Is that at the Veterans Memorial thing south of town, or at the cemetery there in Durham?
Cemetery, Lone Pine Cemetery there in town,
okay.
And then NSA, the National Smoke Jumper Association, is putting like bronze medals, the Keeper of the Flame medals, on each headstone.
Oh wow!
So they're gonna do that day too, and then speaker's gonna come, which right now might be me. So I might be the speaker, but since I was a smoke jumper for 5 years, and then been to Man Gulch twice, and I've been doing a bunch of research, but. So I've been doing more research because of Marvin, and holy cow, I've been reading some of the stories as I go, and so sad. Sally survived. He's only 17.
Right.
And then Marvin was 21, I want to say. So
Sally was the youngest, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, because I think he lied about his age to make it. So and
Wonder how that worked, because now they won't. You can't officially work for the Forest Service or the government unless you're 18.
18,
But
yeah.
maybe it was a little different back in those days.
Yeah, it must have been. And I think he
Yeah,
might have lied and said he was 18 or something.
I know some people did.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah, even to get in the war too, right?
Yeah,
A lot of people lied to get.
they talked their parents into verifying that they were 18, and they weren't.
Yeah. Oh, and, oh man, I'm glad we brought this up because like you're such wealth of knowledge with lookout history when we're both lookout buffs. But the Mormon Peak lookout up there by Lolo, do you know the spot?
I know of it. I haven't been to it, but I know of it.
Yeah, I went there last year for the first time with one of the volunteer groups that was doing the trail work up to Carlton Lakes there.
Uh-huh.
And man, it's a cool spot. It's like on this open knob. I don't think anything of it. We were killing some time waiting for somebody else to come up, and so I was just like, oh, just see where this road goes. And then sure enough, there was Mormon Peak Lookout. Site was right there. Nothing's really left besides the footings. But I think like this concrete stairs going up to the actual like wood stairs because it was a elevated tower. But that Marvin Sherman fellow who died in Man Gulch, he actually was up there for a few years. And there's a story that one of the locals who was his friend talks about because they had a family ranch down there. And he'd talk his folks into buying him beer. And then he'd ride his horse. And he was getting paid by the ranger to ride his horse up there to ride the telephone line. And then he'd stop in and say hey to Marvin. And they'd, ride the line together and drink beer. And
He'd check the line. The guy would check the line to make sure everything was...
Yep. Yeah. So
insulators weren't falling off or something.
Yep. Yeah. He got paid $10. He said to go ride the line, and then after they were done doing that, they'd be sitting at the tower and looking down into Lolo at the dance hall, and wishing they were there. Some nights he said, and then most nights they were happy where they were. They said they were already at heaven.
That's funny.
Yeah. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. Really cool.
Man. And speaking of lookouts, you had a busy week this week with lookouts, huh?
Yeah. It's been kind of a busy month. We did Bitterroot lookout training around the 16th or 17th of June, somewhere right in there. And the way we always do that, it's a 2-day thing. And we've been lucky enough over the last years, starting maybe in 01, the Bitterroot Hotshot crew got that new building after the fires of 2000, and money came in and all that sort of thing. And because when I was there, we were living in what was the old visitor center, the old ranger station, and then became the visitors. Going to be a visitor center. They kicked us out. We had to go to a garage bay. Then that got put on hold, and we moved back in there. Then we moved back out again, and so we kind of bounced around at Darby.
Yeah.
And then when they got that nice new building, Jay was really good when he was the soup, and Cash worked with him and then got the job. They've both been really, really good about just turning their training room over to us for those 2 days, whatever the dates happen to be. I'd always get a hold of them well ahead of time, and they'd like, yep, if we're around, we'll stay out of your way. If we're gone, have at it,
Yeah.
So they've been good about that. So we usually we'll meet there at the Hotshot building in the morning, and everybody will do names and who they are, which lookout they're on, that sort of thing. And sometimes the Forest FMO or AFMO will come down and say a few words or whatever.
Yeah.
And after we do that, we have the Weather Service, some folks from the National Weather Service that do fire weather up in Missoula here, come down, and sometimes they'll do a talk about lightning, fire behavior. And then I always ask them, since I've been involved in setting it up, I always ask them to give the latest fire predictions of, what they think the next 3-month period is going to be like, as best they know. And then after that, we always try to go to one of the lookouts. So there's only a limited number at that time in June that you can conceivably get to. Deer Mountain being one, Teepee Point and Sula Peak being the other two. Sometimes Willow if the road's open from snow. Once in a while, Bear Cone and or Lookout Mountain. All the rest, like Salmon and Hell's Half, and those are just too far away, and you definitely can't get out there that early anyway.
I was gonna say Spot had a ton of snow this year.
Yeah, you saw the photos of the snow melt.
Yeah.
Yeah, their setup that they have out there to get water.
Yeah, built that cool arch.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'd been planning all spring to go to Lookout Mountain. Well, the weather that weekend before the training was supposed to happen was predicting snow, and sure enough, the temperature at my house got down to 40 degrees that night, just south of Darby, and I just know traditionally that if it's 40 degrees at my house on the valley floor, the lookouts are getting snow.
Yeah.
And so I contacted Christy up at Lookout Mountain probably about 5 o'clock the next morning because she was going to need to come down. Like, Christy, do you have snow? And she had like 6 inches of snow up there.
Man.
And she didn't figure she'd have trouble getting down, and she didn't. But we just decided that, we would probably, it was supposed to snow all day, and it sounds like from what her husband Jim said it did, off and on. And it just didn't make sense to try and convoy the group up there. I mean, if you can't see anything, you can't see anything.
Yeah, you're just in a
And
box.
one of the things that we were planning on doing was to have David Fox, who's the fuel specialist down at West Fork, have him come up and point out, because he knows tree species well enough that even from far away or from a lookout, he can pick out, okay, that's Doug fir, that's lodgepole, whatever, and then just kind of give a talk about the fire behavior of those kinds of tree species. And we always discuss with the lookouts that if they can see patches of bug kill, that when they do a size up for a fire that goes into the supervisor's office, and then whichever district it's on is listening, that the FMO duty officer, whatever, would know this, that's a danger zone because of snags and that sort of stuff. So David was planning on doing that, but we had to cancel all that.
Oh man.
So we ended up doing something we've never done before, really, which is kind of surprising, but we just never had. Almost all the lookouts have never been to Central Dispatch in Hamilton.
Oh yeah.
They talked to those folks, and those folks talked to them over the course of the summer.
Yeah.
Virtually every day when there's lookout check-ins, or if there's fires, the lookouts obviously are turning them into Hamilton.
Yeah.
So we just decided that since we weren't going to go to Lookout Mountain, we'd have some extra time that morning. And after the weather guy left, we all convoyed up to Hamilton to dispatch.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and went in. And Kobe was there that day.
Yeah.
And I had talked to him ahead of time, telling him, like, look, if we can't go to Lookout Mountain, maybe we'll bring the group up to visit you, and
Which
folks can see what's going on.
Yeah.
So we did. We went in, and he asked everybody to tell him which lookout they were on and everything. You hear voices, but you never see anybody.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that was cool, and he introduced the other lookouts that were there. Kevin wasn't there that day. I think he'd worked the weekend, so he was off that Monday.
Oh, gotcha.
But my first question to him for the group was, okay, so I'm at Salmon Mountain doing my volunteer gig, and I spot a fire, and I call in, give you the legal. What happens next? And then he just walked through, how they input stuff on the computers, and they have the wall maps and all this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And the forest FMO will usually come in when he hears what's going on to take a look at the map too, and maybe has some input on what's going to happen. And so it was really interesting. And the lookout folks asked a lot of questions, which was cool.
Yeah.
And he had good answers for them and everything. And they talked after we got back down to Darby for the rest of the day that it was really interesting seeing that place physically.
Yeah.
And none of them ever saw it when it was out at the airport for that time period too, at the heli-tac base when dispatch was out there.
Yeah.
So
I bet that's kind of cool because I never even thought about it, because probably some of those lookouts who don't have like boots on the ground fire experience, they probably wouldn't know the process, so they just call it in, maybe not hear anything for a while.
You never know what they do in there.
All of a sudden, like firefighters show up, whether it be like smoke jumpers or hot shot, typically
how
probably district
how do they
folks.
get called? How is that decision made?
That's what I was
and
gonna say.
and and we all know enough that if it's a really remote fire and it's something that the forest wants suppressed, that it's probably going to be the jumpers.
Yeah, yeah,
When we had the rappel program here for a few years, those guys would be involved sometimes too, depending on what was going on, because they could land in rappel down in windier conditions than sometimes the jumpers would be able to.
yeah, and more of a small kind of hole too, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and sometimes I remember they landed like within 25 feet of where the fire was,
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
which is awesome as a firefighter, as a repeller, not much
Yeah.
hiking in, and
But anyway, so yeah, it was really cool that they got to touch bases with dispatch and vice versa. And
yeah,
yeah. So then we went back, and then we spent the rest of the day just talking about just procedures and stuff like that, refreshing them on because there are a few new people this year.
oh yeah,
The gal that's on teepee, Sophie, she's done a lookout before, but I think it was like 20 years ago, and I can't remember where she said where.
oh,
So, she's not familiar with Bitterroot procedures, and a couple of the St. Mary's volunteers were new. So
Yeah.
we always just talk about interactions with Air Patrol, what the plane's going to ask of them, and vice versa, and how we make that work. And then just in general, just reminder stuff. I mean, it's things we do every year, and those that are veterans like Mark and Rhett and some of the others have been around since the 90s.
yeah,
It's old hat for them, but it's just always a good review that remember that, folks on the ground need to know ahead of time with your size up that the fire is adjacent to an old burn or partly in an old burn, or there's bug kill, or just things that are dangers,
yeah,
just procedural stuff. And we spend the rest of the afternoon doing that. And then the second day is usually only a partial day thing. We meet in the morning back at the Hot Shop building, and then I do an RT 130 fire lantern refresher, but it's tailored more for the lookouts. We still talk about the 10s and 18s and all that stuff, and a lot of times I'll just bring a handout, that's got them printed off, and
oh yeah,
we'll just talk about it. And once in a while, just to break it up a little bit, I've got I had it transferred from VHS to DVD, the old original 10s and 18s film from the 80s.
oh really?
Yeah, they're kind of funny because they have these scenarios and everything, but
Yeah, that's cool.
and we'll watch those sometimes and just basically talk about stuff, and then round robin experiences of folks with things that they've encountered or listened happen, that firefighters are doing on the fires that relate to 10s and 18s and all that.
Yeah,
And then I always have the practice shelters there, and we watch the film, and then go out, and if it's sometimes inside, which we had to do this time because it was raining that day.
oh yeah, yeah.
But sometimes we'll go out on the grass there at Darby and do everybody does a practice deployment,
Oh, nice.
either inside or outside, just so they familiarize.
Yeah, and the video is really helpful too because it shows the wind direction and where you want to be, have your feet pointed and
Yeah.
how to get in and out.
And when we couldn't really do that inside this time, but when we're outside, I'll usually say, as each group is going to deploy, okay, the fire is coming from whatever direction, and I'll point.
Yeah,
And then, you'll line your feet so your feet are closest to that direction that it's going rather than your head.
yeah,
So, it's just it's good training. I mean, they are in the fire environment.
mm-hmm.
Just because they're on a mountaintop doesn't mean that, some of the lookouts like bear cones still have a huge swath of timber that comes up on one particular side, and you could get a fire there.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
and we tell the new folks that they should ask the experienced firefighters on the district to come up and just give them a little heads up talk about, okay, if a fire approaches this lookout from whatever direction and you can't drive off or be flown off or whatever, what do you do?
Yeah,
where's
where do you
where's
go?
the best place to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that usually ends the 2 days then, and then everybody's ready to rock and roll out to wherever they're going if they can get there yet.
Yeah, totally. And you know, like for that new gal at TP, and for folks who you know, haven't been around the forest much, it's good to probably meet everybody too, because you talk a
Yeah.
little bit on the radio. You should look out right to each other a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe you don't know what they look like, so that's kind of nice, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's worked out really good over the years, so we're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, totally. And you kind of build that friendship right away, and then you know you probably won't be as hesitant because, you know, especially if you know, for me, if I was brand new as a lookout, and then you have like the Mokes who've been doing it forever, and
Somebody out on the highway.
yeah, it must have been. Oh, look out, the big old dump truck. But you know, like, so they could call, you know, like for me, if I was brand new, like, you know, I'd maybe a little intimidated by the Mokes who've been doing it forever. But you know, then you meet them, like, oh, these people are really, really nice and a wealth of knowledge, and you know, then you wouldn't feel so nervous about tapping them for some information, like, you know, whatever question you might have, you know.
Yeah, the lookout program is it's just such a good thing. I mean, it's still the most effective way of finding fires on the forest. I mean, there's just no question about it. If
Yeah,
it's in their scene area, they're going to see it.
absolutely.
99% of the time, that's what happens, you know. And like I've said before, and we've talked about before, the plane supplements that because it can cover a lot of ground. But that's why when we get within range of whatever lookout's territory we're on, I or whoever else is the observer will call and ask them what they want looked at. And usually, what they want looked at is an area where they've seen, I saw a strike behind such and such a ridge. I can't see down in there. Could you look there?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the shape of their own mountain. They can't see all the way to the bottom, maybe on any sides or maybe on just a couple of sides, and they'll say, "We saw strikes go down, you know, below our mountain, out from our mountain, and we can't see down there. Could you take a look?" So that's where the plane looks, and that's usually where the plane finds fires, is where, or the observer in the planes find fires, I should say,
Yeah.
is where the lookouts can't see them. So the two work totally together. The two systems work totally together.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like the thing that they've always been talking about is like technology kind of coming into phase out, but I don't think that's in my mind been a thing. I think it's more complementary, if anything, to what we already have with the lookouts being in place. Because the lookouts live out there, like you said, they see the storm, they see the strikes, and then
Right.
you you can get on your phone now the lightning map, and it's going to show you where some positive and negative strikes were, but. You were not. It's better to have eyes on the ground, and then it's super.
Right.
It's instead of having to send someone out there, you got somebody out there already. So you're like,
Yeah, so, but I mean, how
yeah,
would that work? You know, that somebody sitting in, let's say, the supervisor's office or in Missoula or someplace, controlling a drone that's programmed to go where the map shows lightning strikes, and it can't talk to the lookouts or anything.
yeah, and it
You
can't
know,
even
it's
be out
just,
there very long. You know,
yeah, yeah, they still can't fly. Well, some of the military ones probably can, but
yeah,
we probably don't have those long range drones at our beck and call, and they're really expensive.
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah, and you know, lookout doesn't cost that much. There's quite a few of them
not
that are
really.
volunteers. Yeah, not. That's what always bugged me about them getting rid of it for like budget purposes. It's not like they're making a lot.
And during the summer, anytime you know that there's fires, the lookouts are on P numbers, just like firefighters are.
Yeah,
So
it's all
you
coming
know
out of that
it's
budget.
not like it's coming out of the forest budget or anything.
Yeah, totally.
So
And I always felt as a firefighter, I always felt better having a lookout out in the country because, especially in rugged country like this, you could be in a pretty deep canyon and
they've helped all of us. I mean, I don't know about your experiences or if you know you've ever jumped fires and had lookouts within your area of your fire that you could check in with, but
yeah,
that's one of the procedures here on the Bitterroot is that if smoke chasers go out on a fire, wherever it is, let's just say for the sake of us talking, and it's in Spot Mountain and or Salmon's field of vision,
yeah,
those folks on those lookouts know that those people are out there on a fire. They know where the fire is because they probably turned it in. And so they're keeping eyes on that stuff all the time. That's what they do.
yeah,
And if they see weather coming in that could potentially impact firefighters, I mean, you know this, and I do from our experience as ground pounders, that a lot of times you're on a fire and you really don't have a good field of vision because of tall trees around you
yep,
or a ridge that blocks incoming weather's standard direction for us from the west or southwest primarily
Yep.
onto the forest, that we can't necessarily see what's going on. And those lookouts, they will tell you if
Yeah.
anything's coming in. They always do. I remember being on a fire at West Fork, and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had it lined, and it was like the second day of the fire, so it was just in mop up phase. But we couldn't see anything. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, we got a call. I got a call that from Bearcon that, hey, there's a pretty good lightning storm tracking in your direction, and it's probably going to reach you guys within about a half hour. So heads up.
Yeah.
So we got up and made our rounds around the fire just to, see for sure that we weren't getting any flare-ups or embers or whatever that could be affected by the wind, and luckily we weren't.
Yeah.
But that's those lookouts. Those lookouts do that stuff for you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And like you were saying, especially in our country, and well, everywhere that has a lookout usually is because of the rugged country. And if you're at the face on the east side of the Bitterroots, you can't see anything coming. Like you said,
No.
all the storms are coming from the west on the opposite side of the mountain from you. But we
Yep.
have St. Mary's right there on top, and they can see a long ways off.
Yep. And we have it set up on the forest too that if folks are out on a fire and they're going to be there all night, that we set up a night contact, and the night contact is generally one of the lookouts that's closest, because if they have a problem and they can't get out radio wise, and unless there's a bunch of fires, Hamilton usually doesn't staff all night. I mean,
Yeah.
they have the phone set that it goes to whoever's the duty lookout, I guess, or duty dispatcher for the
Yep.
night. It'll ring them at home, but the lookouts have all those phone numbers. It's all set up. They know who's the night contact in Hamilton at a home number. They have a direct contact because they and the lookouts communicate before the firemen go off at night if they do. If
Yep.
they're up all night, the lookouts know that. If they're going to bed down, they let them know when they're bedding down, ensure that they have communication. And so the lookouts are all night long. They're available if they see anything that they don't like, that they can fill those guys in. Or
Yeah.
if somebody gets injured,
Yeah.
they can relay that information. So
Absolutely, and so that's another confusing thing for me, why we would get rid of them as an agency, or just as as a fire, not even an agency, but as a firefighter, as wildland firefighters, because DNRC, BLM, Forest Service, we all have lookouts, but like you said, it's another layer of safety, and a big layer of safety, and we're always safety is key in our world.
It's such an important thing to all of us when we're on the ground. I remember being
Yeah.
really thankful that those folks are up there, and if something happens, that I can get a message out in the middle of the night or whenever.
Absolutely, and most of them have helipads, so
Yeah.
you have that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, maybe not necessarily at the fire, but I mean, there's capabilities if need be to get people out of places. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and one that's somewhat maintained. Well, it is maintained. So like versus most of the places we go in the woods, we'd have to construct one. And at least if we're within vicinity, like you said. I mean, not always, but like within vicinity of a lookout.
And I know that has had to happen at times. I mean, I remember experiencing that sort of thing, that we had to cut a helispot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, and that kind of actually ties into the note I received on my truck last night. It was actually my wife was driving it, and it was from Leif
Leif Haugen.
Haugen, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his, for folks who don't know, he's and I didn't really know until I talked to you and Rick, that he's a legendary lookout. And I mean, Borg actually did mention him because he's got a little office there at the Flathead Hotshot base there in Hungry Horse. So I'd seen the name, but I didn't really know much about him. And then you sent me a video.
Borg was the last name that he mentioned on that,
yeah,
wasn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, it's cool. I've got it on my phone. I wanted to send it to Mark and Rhett this
cool.
morning because they know Leaf too.
Oh, really?
They had that meeting. Well, the day that you came out when we closed Salmon,
Yeah.
they were going to have a all lookout meeting up in Missoula, and they did at one of the breweries. Just Leaf came, and folks from the Idaho Lookout Group came, and Mark and Rhett,
Oh, yeah.
and maybe Christy. I can't remember right now, but I was originally planning on going up there, but we ended up being so late getting out of there with all those flat tires and all that
Oh
stuff that
yeah.
by the time I got home, they were going to meet at 6 p.m. And by the time I got home, it was almost 8. So there was no way I was going to be able to go up. But yeah, Leaf was at that.
Oh,
So
very cool.
the note that you got yesterday from him that you sent me last night,
Yeah.
he said in the note, I'm a long time fire lookout on the Flathead and have enjoyed your podcasts, especially the Tanner Rene ones, Borg 2.
Yeah.
Best, happy summer, Leaf. That's
Oh,
cool.
so cool. Thank you so much,
He's a
Leaf.
really cool guy. And like I was telling you, he's also involved. He's an excellent carpenter and builder.
Yeah.
And he's made a couple of trips over the past years to look out over on, well, Gray Peak over on Powell, which is the one that's talked about in The Ranger That Cooked the Hole in the Sky film based on
yeah.
Norman McLean's story about that time.
Yeah.
And Norman didn't really, he did look out stuff over on Powell, but it wasn't really his forte. And I think I mentioned that in the letter that I got from him that we read on one of my earlier podcasts with you.
Yeah.
But he did it because it was his job, you know?
Yeah.
And at that point, Gray Peak didn't have a tower up on top or anything. He camped, I think, about maybe a quarter of a mile in a tent camp below the top, and then he'd hike up there, and there was a portable alidate, I guess, on a board or on a post or a stump, and that's how he would turn in fires. But
Oh, gotcha.
there's a cupola, an old cupola style lookout up there. It has the main living room and then the smaller room up a staircase,
Yeah.
and that's where the alidade was, and that's the one that's still there, and it's been there, I think, since the late 1920s.
Whoa.
And it was, in disrepair. It hasn't been staffed for a long time, but Powell's been restoring it, and Leaf was involved in that work
Oh, very
a
cool.
couple of different summers or falls after he'd come off Toma.
Yeah.
He would go out there and work on it with some of the Powell folks. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And he's worked on other lookouts too, and I think he helped restore Toma, the one he's in.
That's what I was gonna say, because in the video he kind of mentioned it, just because of how old it is and it needs constant repair, and so he's just, every summer he seems like he's doing something on it, and which is really cool because it seems like a very traditional lookout thing to do. Like I mean, that one fella built his own, but on Otter Peak, that Tarzan fella,
Right.
like holy cow! But I mean,
That was up Lolo, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of by Indian Hill lookout there.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So that's cool. Yeah, Leaf's a good guy.
Yeah, Leaf's a good
Really
guy.
good guy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leaf. The kind words, man, I appreciate it, and especially coming from him. I mean, that's a really big compliment.
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
but I'm just lucky to have guys like you. You and Borg and Tanner and all the other good guests I've had. It's super fortunate, and I think once I started this, and I knew,
never met Borg, but
Oh, really?
but I knew of him. Harvey Carr was running Flathead for a lot of the years that. Well, let's see. He was one of the squad leaders, I think, and then he ran the crew after I left the Bitterroot in '95.
Oh, gotcha.
But he came down to here to some Bitterroot fires that I got to be either an IC or a safety officer on, and it was always fun working with Flathead. A
Yeah.
lot. They were a good crew always.
Always, yeah. But I heard nothing but good things. Were they doing the gaggle back then too?
Doing what?
The flathead gaggle. Have you heard about the flathead gaggle? Do you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so cool. We talked about it a little bit, and
Yeah.
and kind of the the reason behind it, like the ethos behind why the gaggle is why it is, and the explanation's really sound. It's so you don't get hypnotized by the boots in front of you. Which happens to all of us. It's pretty easy to get, on a long hike, just get stuck looking at the boots in front of you.
Yep. Oh, and I was going to mention too that Tim from the Hotshot Wake Up
Oh yeah.
interviewed Borg, I think last year,
Yep.
maybe last spring.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. So, yeah, it was cool that you got to talk to him also. And I haven't listened to that podcast yet.
I've neither. Yeah, I meant to, because Borg brought it up maybe during or after, I can't remember, but he said that Tim fellow from the Hot Shot Wake Up's a great guy, and I've had some good conversations back and forth with Tim over Instagram and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, seems super nice, and what he's doing for the fire community is huge, staying updated on
He's
everything,
really
and
good. He's really up on all the issues and stuff like that. And,
yeah, and all the big fires, and
yeah, and he's super honest about
yeah,
his opinions about stuff are pretty right on, because he's been there and he's done what you and I have done, and he was a hotshot soup, and
yeah,
he
and
knows what's going on.
yeah, and it's important because I don't think the public sometimes hear it. I think all of us in the Forest Service or in any kind of fire agency, we all try to kind of, maybe half, glasses half full kind of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
and sugarcoat things from time to time, and where he's not in the agency anymore, and he has a good memory of what it was like and what it is like. So
Yep. Yeah.
he tells it how it is, and I think it's important because the rest of us are like, yeah, that was kind of rough, but
It's really neat when he does interviews, or not interviews, I shouldn't say, but when his podcast will feature some incident that's occurred at an injury or something like that to a firefighter, and the process of trying to get somebody off the hill and that sort of thing, because he's been around long enough that he's experienced some of that, like
yeah,
some of us have too,
totally,
and he'll explain really well, kind of what's going on behind the scenes as far as the crew trying to cut a hell spot safely, perhaps, or having to hike somebody out or all
yeah.
that. So it's really interesting.
It is, yeah, and probably for a lot of folks who don't know, or maybe even folks that have been in fire a little bit, it's good to hear because, like you said, it goes pretty in depth in it. But for the folks who don't know, that gives a little more view into like, when an injury does happen, it can be some time before you get somebody out. It's not like an instant thing,
Yeah,
So like,
yeah,
cutting the hell spot takes a while, and that,
yeah. Or getting medical resource help. I mean,
yeah,
most all the hotshot crews have EMTs, and a lot of the district crews too, but sometimes they can only do so much. And if
yeah,
it's really a bad injury, then it's critical that you try and get a paramedic or some such in there.
yep.
And it's not easy sometimes with the distance to even get a helicopter that can get one of those folks in a timely manner. So
Yeah, totally. And I know I was talking to some of the Hell-Tech folks recently, and they've been kicking around the idea of trying to get short haul here in the valley, and
mm-hmm.
that's
I've heard
a real
that.
game changer if we get that going.
It'd be good.
Yeah,
It'd be really good.
getting a smaller spot, not have to cut a big hell spot, and get into a better area quicker. And usually there's a paramedic that comes with a short haul, so that's a big help too.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But then, once lookout training was over, then it was just a matter of, when all the districts, Deer Mountain was already able to be staffed because the snow was already off. And they were able to get the teepee before lookout training and get Sophie kind of oriented up there.
oh yeah,
Tanner still couldn't get to Willow. You still obviously couldn't get to St. Mary's because it's so high.
yeah.
Same with Salmon. Same with Spot. I don't think the Mokes got up till maybe later that week or early the next week. I can't remember for sure right now because of snow
Yeah.
and pack string being able to get up there and this, that, and the other. But then that all started happening, and the first West Fork lookout that we were able to open up that I was involved with was Lookout Mountain,
Oh,
and
very cool.
yeah,
Got a quick.
it was the first one that we got up, and then Bear Cone not too long after. Spot got up, and then Salmon is always later just because of where it is. And
Oh, really?
yeah, you've
Gets-
been out there, and
Yeah,
it's
beautiful.
a standalone mountain, and it always gets a lot of snow, no matter what. It seems like even if it's not a giant snow year, because it's not very many feet under 9,000,
Yeah.
and being a standalone mountain, when storms come across from whatever direction out there, southwest, west, northwest, it gets it
Yeah,
and it gets nailed.
just right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really surprised when you sent me that one video of just right below the lookout, ton of snow. So,
Recently.
yeah, recently,
Yeah.
not long ago.
Yeah, we finally. What's dependent for us on Salmon Mountain is when the Elk City Road, which runs right below it, and then the trail goes right off of Elk City Road, as you know now. until the Elk City Road is open and you can get out that far, there's no point in even trying to get up there.
Yeah.
You know, in the past, some of the Air Patrol pilots, one of them owned, in conjunction with some friends of his own aircraft, and he and I would just, we'd split the cost of a flight, 2 or 3 hour flight,
Yeah.
with his plane, and we'd do our own personal pan lookout review of the backcountry, to see where the snow was at.
Oh,
Well,
very cool.
he doesn't do that anymore, so, and had to sell the plane, so that took care of that. And there was
Wow.
another guy, Bob Shoemaker, who was a member of the Salmon Volunteer Group, who was a pilot, didn't have a plane, but had access to planes from friends in Hamilton.
Yeah.
And he and I used to do that also. But in recent years, we kind of lost that capability.
Man. Yeah, because some of the videos that you sent me were just unreal,
And I still got to get together with you and show you the best one ever was the flight in that old Aranca that a guy on West Fork, a private guy, owned, and took me for a flight. The Aranca was built in 1946,
Oh,
just a matter of a month or so before I was born. And he had this plane, and it was an old one, uh, and you'll see when you see the pictures of
yeah.
it. But the passenger sat directly behind the pilot,
Oh,
and he didn't have an intercom system in it. So if I wanted to tell him to turn in a different direction or whatever, I had to tap him on the shoulder. And he wore headphones, not because he had a radio, but just we wore them for the noise because
oh.
the plane was really loud.
Yeah.
So I'd tap him on the shoulder, and he'd lift his earpiece off, and I'd shout, "Turn left and go where I tell you. We're going to go toward Salmon Mountain," or whatever.
Yeah.
And he'd give me the thumbs up, or
Yeah. Okay.
the okay sign,
Yeah.
and I'd guide him out to where we wanted to go, and then I'd tap him and go, "Circle the lookout," and then I'd take pictures or write notes or whatever. It was incredible. We went everywhere on that particular flight,
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
yeah, and got some amazing footage. And it was when there was still a lot of snow on all of them.
Yeah.
And did the flyby of Medicine Point, which was always fun for me because that was my first Forest Service job and home in the
Yeah.
summer of '76.
So cool.
And we'd fly by that big snow collection ridge, which, was the one that lasted the entire summer for me.
I know, it's so nuts when you're telling me that.
Yeah.
Man.
And I guess it used to be like that a lot back in the early '70s and earlier. William Boggs, who you met up at Salmon when we closed last year,
Yeah.
he and I were just talking about that when we were up there last week. And he said that in the early '70s, he and his then wife Deidre, started in '71 on Salmon, and they worked out of Magruder, the Magruder Ranger District, which
very
was
cool.
the fifth Bitterroot district back in those days. That first summer and the first couple of summers, they had patches of snow the whole summer up there.
Man.
And it just doesn't happen anymore.
No.
Never.
No, for me, you got the good view of St. Mary's, and it usually holds snow pretty good, being one of the higher peaks.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're usually like, if we have snow this time of year towards the end of July, you're like, oh, all right, that's a pretty good deal, and try to kind of base the fire season on how much snow is up there, and
Mm-hmm.
not as accurate as it used to be. But it used to be if that thing held some snow, it was going to be a less volatile
Right.
summer,
Right.
But
Right.
yeah,
But yeah, so Salmon was the last one we opened, and there's a huge construction project that's going on up there this summer. In fact, the contract opened on the 15th, so folks might be up there right now.
yeah.
We went up a few days before to take some things out of the lookout that would be in the way, because the interior is going to get painted. Supposed to get a new shake shingle roof.
Oh, cool.
They're going to paint all of the cabinets and everything inside, everything outside. It's probably going to get all new shutters made.
Oh, it'd be nice.
They're going to refinish the wood floor on the inside, so it's going to be a pretty involved project.
Man,
Yeah.
that reminds me. I talked to Joy just this week, and her husband had gone up to Blue Nose, and she said it's starting to get in pretty rough shape. And I know in the past you pitched the salmon to try to get them to fix it up, but she said one of the shutters had
No,
looks like it broke the window, and now it's getting real bad.
yeah, they haven't done anything with it for a long, long time. You know, they were going to let it burn in 2012 during the Mustang fire,
Yeah.
and I got wind of it. Uh, the FMO down there that year had been on the hotshot crew with me way back, and you know they weren't going to wrap it or do anything, and so we got our historian here at the SO at the time, Mary Williams, involved, and she went down to the Type 1 team meeting with her counterpart down in the Salmon Chalice, told them the lookout's on the historic register, you're not going to let it burn up. Of course, the Type 1 team, they didn't really know anything about it.
Yeah, I bet.
And they're like, you know, I told Tom, my friend who was the FMO down there, I said, West Fork, we have all the wrap, we have everything, we will wrap it.
Yeah.
It's like, suit yourself, you know. So Mary went down there and pitched it to the team, and they said, yeah, absolutely. If West Fork wants to wrap it, just have them keep a list of all the wrap materials and stuff that they use to do it, and we will give them a P number to replace it. And we did. We went down
cool.
there, and Rick Flock, the Forest FMO, went down. Justin Abbey went down. Melissa Wegner went down. I went down. We all wrapped it and
Very cool.
and got it taken care of. And then Abby went back up because Mustang burned all summer, and it was way down west of the lookout when we were wrapping it, but it eventually worked its way up. And that fall when we unwrapped it, there were, you know, spot fire burns that were, you know, like within 20 or 30, 40 feet of the lookout.
Jeez.
So it's a good thing we wrapped it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's sad that they don't take care of it, and they aren't going to do anything to stop it from falling apart, which it is starting to do.
Yeah.
But it's a crackerjack lookout. It's a beautiful place. The view is just astounding in all directions. I mean,
I bet.
it was as important to the Bitterroot as it was to the Salmon Chalice, because it's the headwaters of the West Fork of the Bitterroot River are on the dropout on that side of the lookout.
Oh, yeah.
That leads to the Bitterroot, the headwaters of the river. And it had three different branches of phone lines that came off of it in the day. One of them went all the way back down to the Salmon River to Shoup, and then to Indianola and on to North Fork. There was another branch that bailed off into no man's land and went to West Fork on the Bitterroot, and then another one that branched and went kind of at the Salmon Bitterroot divide up toward Blue Nose Peak in that country, because there was a tent camp lookout up there on
cool.
Blue Nose Peak. So I mean, it was a super important lookout, and it still would be if it was staffed.
That's what I was thinking. And I mean, to at one point have, you know, the Forest Service put that much time and effort into it and then have it just kind of go away. It's a real shame.
But they did the same thing to Oriana, which is an equally beautiful spot on the Salmon Chalice, and
I heard Oriana's in worse shape.
It's fallen apart too.
Yeah.
And a lot of the others that were out there have burned in different fires because they're in the wilderness, and the forest didn't want to deal with them anymore and just let them burn.
Yeah, what a shame. Yeah,
but
you just don't get those things back.
Yep. So, so all the West Fork lookouts are gone except for salmon because of the work that's being done and those guys being up there and everything.
Which is great. Yeah. So that's part of the reason why I was talking about Blue Nose.
It's really good that the Bitterroot's going to fix it up.
Yeah, and keep it around.
And Medicine Point, I think last summer had, some window stuff done to it. There was a bunch of work got done out at McCart, both McCart and Medicine Point being rentals.
Yeah.
And you went to Gerd Point, and Gerd Point is also in the rental program on I guess it's on Stevensville, or is it on Darby?
It's on Darby, yeah.
Yeah, kind of on the boundary.
It's right there in the boundary, yeah.
Yeah.
You think it should be on Stevensville, I think, by the boundary line. I think the boundary line's like on Scalcoho, but yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I'm pretty sure it's Darby.
But anyway, the Bitterroot's getting a lot of, and Spot Mountain is supposed to get a new roof it's a flat top R6 R6 model,
Oh,
but it's supposed to finally get its new roof this summer, which is long overdue.
yeah.
So
Oh, that's great, man. That's so cool that they're getting refurbed and be around for the
the
generations to
Bitterroot
come.
Forest cares about lookouts, and it's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
It's
There's
a
a
really good thing.
lot out there in such beautiful country too.
Yeah, yeah. So then, something else that you and I were thinking about talking about a little bit is that we're coming up here on the 31st of July. That's the anniversary of the 2000 fires on the Bitterroot,
Yeah.
which was a really, really big deal. I mean, I think the grand total acreage on our forest that burned that summer was 350,000 plus acres.
Jeez.
Yep. And the only district that wasn't affected by that on the Bitterroot was Stevensville. Um, I worked at Stevensville that summer, and we'd talked about that before. Um, but just by coincidence, at the same time that the lightning was coming on to West Fork, then eventually to Sula and Darby a little later in the afternoon, the Blodgett fire broke out during all of that due to an escaped campfire, which was found later on from a homeless person that had
Oh,
been
man.
camping up there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
shame.
just weird that it broke out at the same time,
Yeah.
but it was because of the weather and everything. So I thought because of that, that's only a little over a week away here now.
Yeah.
That I brought some kind of weather information for that summer and so far now this year as a comparison.
Kind of lining up with that.
Yeah, yeah, and let's see, got to grab the right thing here. So just for a comparison between the year 2000 and the year 2024, which is obviously this year.
Yeah.
So for so far this year, in in 2000, January to now, toward the end of July, the total precip for that period, January 1st to today, was 5.89 inches for what, almost 7 months.
Yeah. It's not much.
Right now, the same time period for this year, 2024, January 1st to today, is 10.54 inches for
Ooh.
the year. So it's like half as much in 2000.
Yeah.
There's why right there. There just was not much precip at all
Oh
in,
man.
in 2000.
I
This month, right now in 2024, at my house, I've had 0.11 precip, which isn't much for the entire month.
No.
And let's see, did I put that down for July of 2000? So July of 2000 had 0.90 for the month so far, which still wasn't very much.
No.
But that's the difference.
Yeah.
Half the precip in 2000.
Man, and
But what's interesting is that the day of the starts on July 31st, and I brought my calendar
oh hey.
from 2000 with me
Yeah.
because I keep track of the rain at my house every day that I'm around. If I was gone on fires, obviously I couldn't do it those
Yeah.
days. But on July 31st in 2000, the day of the starts, there was some precip with the clouds and stuff, the big thunder's heads.
Oh yeah.
And I had gotten on that day at my house, I was gone all day, but when I got home late that night, I had 0.33 in my rain can.
Oh.
Yeah. And Lenny Hinman, who was one of the timber forester guys in charge of tree planting and all that stuff, was a permanent employee. He said that when the lightning was going on Sula, he was on the road and it was raining so hard. It was localized,
Oh,
very
really?
localized. It was raining so hard where he was at that particular time for a short period of time that he had to actually pull off the onto the edge of the road and stop driving because he couldn't see.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
nuts, especially with such a big flame front that came through, you know?
But it was just in isolated spots, very
Yeah.
small areas. And William Boggs was on salmon at the time on that day in 2000 on the 31st. Watched the storms coming in from the west and stuff like that. A lady named Sita, who was a real experienced lookout, was on Deer Mountain at the time, and both of them said that when that lightning storm started rolling through, a lot of the strikes were forked, and both forks were starting fires.
Wow.
So there was just
You imagine seeing that?
it just became overwhelming, like right off the bat.
Yeah. That'd be wild to see.
Yeah.
I know Danny was saying he was in some lookout because I think he was in Idaho at that point, and I think they were saying they had the little like ball lightning floating through the lookout. They're all like huddled on, and there's a bunch of them just like huddled on two different stools with the insulators, and there was so much electricity in the air that it was causing little like, I guess like ball lightning to float through
Yeah,
the
I've
lookout.
heard about it, and I've heard lookouts describe it, but I've never seen it myself. But
How
yeah,
wild!
somehow it comes down the insulating copper wiring or whatever, and it'll roll around the floor and bump into stuff. It's small, I guess, like golf ball sized or something, but it's just a little ball of
Like,
lightning,
yeah,
and it bounce off of things, and then sometimes they'd do that for a couple of minutes, sometimes shorter, and then it'd I don't know, sense an opening like under the door or something, and it'd bounce, and zip,
whoa!
bounce out, be gone.
How wild would that be to see?
It'd be crazy,
Oh,
especially if it happened in the middle of the night when it was dark or something. Can you
yeah.
imagine?
Oh, that'd be nuts. You'd just be on your stool, just like, oh no.
Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Stand on the glass leg stool, I guess.
Yeah, not touch anything,
Yeah,
and just ride it out. Oh, wow. Really interesting stuff, man.
yeah. But uh, so I took a look at the weather, the fire weather early this morning.
Yeah.
The weather service puts it out usually anywhere from 2 a.m. to 4 5 a.m., somewhere in that framework.
Yeah.
And in 2000 on 731, and I had to look this up later because I didn't look it up every morning. We'd hear it in the morning briefing and stuff that we do either at work or here on broadcasts from the radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is for July 31st of 2000. This was the morning fire weather forecast. The general forecast for that day was variable clouds, isolated high-based thunderstorms, red flag warning for low relative humidity, high haines, isolated dry lightning, and gusty winds. That was the general forecast for that day in 2000, July 31st. Then the breakdown was max temps estimated to be 90 to 102 valleys, 82 to 92 ridges, minimum RHs 8 to 15%, Haines 6 high, which is as high as it gets, LAL3, which LAL3 here usually that's the one that we get most fires from. Chance of wetting rain 10%. The lightning storm that started the large number of Bitterroot fires occurred this date. That was just a note from
Oh,
later
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So this morning's for us, and we've been pretty dry. I mean, and Haines and everything's been creeping up, and everybody's talking about it, and we're in extreme now, right?
Yep.
As far as
Fire
being able
danger.
to have campfires out in the open and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So this morning's for us. So that one in 2000, I think, was done at 4 o'clock in the morning. Ours this morning that I looked up at home before I came up here to meet you was done at 2:16 a.m. this morning.
Oh, wow.
The general forecast was for today is hot and dry with strong thermal belts during the daytime and poor RH recovery at night. Max temps 95 to 100 valleys, 80 to 85 ridges. So that part's similar.
Yeah.
Minimum RHs for us today, 11 to 20%, and they were 8 to 15% that day. Haines, 5 moderate. It's still pretty high.
Yeah.
Our LAL one, though, is LAL, lightning activity level, is 1. It's not really expected that we're going to have T-storms today
Yeah.
here.
Low
It
possibility.
could, but it's kind of low probability, and the
Yeah.
chance of wetting rain is 0. And Mark and Rhett told me last night that from Spot that someplace way out in the Nez west of them did pick up a little fire yesterday from a isolated thunder cell,
Yeah.
and folks were on it. It was small, and it wasn't expected to do anything. It looked like they caught it or were going to catch it.
Oh, good.
So, but that's the only thing that's been really close to us. So,
Yeah, and that was a real
but
bad.
it looks like our forecast down the line here is for more hot and dry, and a chance maybe of some isolated thunderstorms coming up here before long. But
Yeah. For folks listening, I mean, unfortunately, we do have a few human caused, like the Blodgett one you had to battle back in 2000, which was turned out to be huge, and just like
yeah,
the one up there at Miller Peak was human caused.
yeah,
But if you don't have the human caused starts, like a year like this, we haven't had any really bad thunderstorms, so we could be super dry like we are right
really
now.
lucked out so far.
Yeah, so we'd be all right. But then, on the flip side, like in 2000, then you have like a band like that that's just crazy electrical activity and lots of lightning down strikes. And
Plus, I'm recalling this now that, I mean, 5 inches, 5.5 inches, whatever it was for 7 months in 2000 that's like nothing.
that's nothing.
And Sula had a fire pretty early on. I don't want to say for sure, but maybe late May or early June, that was high elevation, kind of in the backcountry of Sula,
Oh,
and there was patches of snow, and the parts of this fire was like from a lightning strike, an early lightning strike. This thing was creeping around at high elevation between patches of snow early.
man.
And that was like
That's
an
very
eye
strange,
opener.
huh?
I remember everybody talking about it back then, like, holy crap, Sula had this fire last week, at whatever it was, 7,000 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
There were patches of snow, and it was still creeping around between the patches of snow, so that's not a good thing.
No, that's a real bad sign.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. And I think most fire years, like bad ones, there's weird signs like that early on. You wouldn't really put any investment in it because you can't, because you don't know if there's going to be some moisture in June or
Right.
whatever. But when you look back on a season like that, you're like, oh yeah, remember that fire? Like that was kind of an indicator things might get a little weird or bad,
Yeah. Those of us that were around here in 2000, none of us had ever seen anything like that here at home. I remember it was a huge eye opener, and I think I'd mentioned this in that earlier podcast, when I talked some about the fires of 2000. When I was on the hotshot crew, we traveled all over America and, went to other regions, states, tragedy fires,
Oh yeah.
and we had one at home that burned homes and had friends displaced, friends that lost homes, and you kind of understand. I mean, we had empathy, sure.
Yeah.
We like to get overtime and travel and go all over the place, but we had empathy. I remember at Malibu in '93 when we were down there in November of '93, the Bitterroot Hotshot crew,
Yeah.
and we were holding in this parking lot right next to the Pacific Ocean, and these people were streaming out of Malibu, walking, leapfrogging wheelbarrows and carts and stuff with items in it, and they couldn't take them all, and they'd have to walk back up and dump stuff off and leave it in a pile and go back and get more and then move it, and we helped people move cars, trying to get their vehicles that were crammed with their lives inside of these cars and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was horrible, Everybody talks about Southern California and all this stuff, but, just being, it's this crazy place and everything. But I grew up down there. I grew up in San Diego. it's my hometown, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't like to see anything like that happen anywhere. And all
Yep.
of us, I mean, we had no assignment because we couldn't get to where we were supposed to go. So the best move for us was just to stay right where we were until we had no radio commo with any Forest Service people, no frequencies to use that worked. So like we're going to just stay right here. So we walked up the road and we helped people move stuff down. I mean, people were leading horses,
Oh,
you know,
jeez.
just they had no place to go. And
Yeah.
it was just, it really touched all of us on the crew,
I bet,
you
man. And
know.
terrible because you know anyone who owns a house, you got all your life belongings in there, and so then you got to decide like what can you bring, and what's worth saving, and
Yeah.
and give up some of the stuff that.
And
Just,
you know, that next morning, I mean, all of the networks were there. It was a huge fire and very important. And people had already died. And it looked like that evening before when we were holding the beach, you know, holding, and you could look up toward Malibu. There was a Coast Guard cutter that was
oh,
in as close to the shore as it could get because we found out later that it sounded like a lot of those people that lived up in Malibu were going to have to, kind of like Maui,
oh
they
yeah.
were going to have to jump in the water to save their lives. And this cutter was off the coast there as close as it could get with small boats. You know, we could see these boats. Like, what are they doing coming off the cutter? They were theoretically going to go in to try and rescue people. Fortunately, they didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But everybody seems to think that everybody in Southern Cal is, you know, rich Hollywood people and all that. And there are a
Yeah.
lot, but a lot of these people that were streaming down the coast highway had little houses up in the Malibu hills and near the beach that, you know, their families had little cabins and stuff,
Yeah.
small old homes from the 1920s and 30s that were all that they had. They were just common folks like the rest of us, you know. And there was a broadcast on by one of the national networks, and one of these folks was there and was really vocal. It's like, you know, you keep talking about Bo Derek's house burning up and all that stuff. What about us? We've lived here before she was ever born. Nobody cares about our homes.
Yeah.
It was really touching to
Oh,
hear.
I bet, man. And like you said, since the 20s, so generational homes, like, and
Yep.
such probably a big part of the family,
Yeah.
like, because all the
Yeah.
events probably were at a lot of those little homes.
Beautiful
And
little places close to the surf and all that, you know, just I mean, it's like that everywhere in the country though. I
yeah,
mean, everybody has their own part of the pie, and sometimes the pie is pretty small, but it's yours.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you don't have a 20,000 acre ranch, but it's your home.
Yeah,
And then when the fires happened here in 2000, friends of mine and other people were being displaced and everything, it kind of all comes together because we were a part of a tragedy, not tragic in terms of the number of homes burned, but some did,
yeah,
and they were friends of ours.
yeah.
And
And being a small community, you pretty much know everybody.
and and we as firefighters just couldn't do much of anything because it was just a lot of it was backcountry,
Yeah,
but a lot of it was just in places that the only thing that could do anything were heavy helicopters and things like that, you know.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, the fire was so intense in a lot of those spots too, like
The normal ground pounder was just,
powerless,
you couldn't
really.
do much of anything.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
man,
It's crazy stuff. But
it is.
anyway, it's that time of year where that anniversary's coming up, and I know all of us that were part of the Forest Service at that point in time, we still talk about it.
Yeah, totally. And I was only in high school, but I still remember the smoke vividly, and even the University of Montana Grizz football team couldn't even practice in Missoula because the smoke was
Yeah,
so bad, so they had to come over to Butte and
it was
practice.
horrible. I took a series of pictures that summer, you know, as I'd make my rounds. You know, it's sad to say, I was the prevention tech taking over for Bruce Blahnik, who bumped up the normal. He was a permanent, and he became the AFMO under Buster because he was a good firefighter and he needed the help.
Yeah,
I didn't really prevent much of anything. I mean, all you could do is talk to people ahead of time, you know, about being safe because we were kind of in the same conditions as far as no campfires and that sort of stuff. But I'd make my rounds, and I took during the height, the worst of the smoke, right there at the intersection in Hamilton where Safeway is, on the one corner on the east side of the street, and
Yeah.
Citizen State Bank was on the other side. Looking up Main Street, you couldn't see anything at all. Like
Jeez.
not even to the far end of Main Street because it was so smoky. And then when it was all over, and I did this in other places too, I went back to that same exact spot and took the photo looking up Main Street where you could see all the way to the mountains and stuff, up there.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
the comparison is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a smart photo to take because in 17, when we had like the Sunrise Fire and the Lolo Peak Fire,
Yep.
so Missoula was surrounded.
It was real similar.
Yeah, that's what I was
It
going to
was.
ask. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I was working for the Missoula district because they were short on engine bosses that year, and I was still a smoke jumper, but I did a short detail to the fort to help them out. And I remember driving that corridor that's the golf courses on your left side, and then it's like the volunteer or the rural fire departments are on your right. And as soon as you turn the corner, and you should be able to see this beautiful view of the fort, and I couldn't see anything. It was so smoked in. It was nuts. It was like a really heavy fog, and I hadn't really
crazy.
experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was 17 was real similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strange how long it lasted too. I mean, it was like that it felt like a week and a half at least before that smoke really cleared out. I mean, you have
Yeah.
like heavier days and lighter days, but it's still
Well,
like,
and as Lolo Peak, the burn progressed to try and stop it. Progressed down our valley a ways, and as that got closer to here, it was even worse.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Gee, I didn't think, the smoke in Hamilton had to be kind of rough too, huh?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, there were a few days where we had to terminate a couple of air patrol flights just because it was looked like it was going to be okay. If you have good lateral view down, which even when it's smoky you often do, and you can be effective, but there were a couple of days where you're supposed to, on a Cessna small plane, you're supposed to always be following visual flight rules, which means you can see where you're going.
Yeah.
But we'd get south of Hamilton, not very far, and the lateral view was still kind of okay, but you couldn't see anything straight out. And it's like, nope, we need to abort the flight. This is
Not safe.
we're actually not living up to what we're supposed to do as far as visual flight rules. So we're going to call the flight and go back.
Yeah, and man, I'm glad you brought that up, Rene, because I was just talking to somebody recently about my brother was doing a rodeo near Sandpoint, I think is who I was talking to about this. But I jumped a fire the year before in Sandpoint area, and they had a bunch of fires. I mean, it seems like the Panhandle always gets hammered. Storms just seem to just get hung up there, and just unleash their lightning. But we jumped a fire. We were leaving the CASA from the jump base came to pick us up, the jump base in Missoula, and I was I can't remember, I don't remember being the jumper in charge of that deal, but it must have been because I got the option to be in in my jumpsuit, because you have to be in your jumpsuit if you're flying in the jump plane facing sideways. But there's also the jump seats that are like normal airline seats that have a normal seatbelt,
Right.
and there was one of them open for whoever the jumper in charge was. So I was like, oh shoot, yeah, I'll take that. I don't have to get in my jumpsuit then. I could leave it stuffed away and then enjoy the flight. But also you get the headset, so I could hear what the pilots were hearing, and it was pretty smoky. Like, it was really smoky, but I mean, I'd been in denser smoke, and you could still kind of see, and it was a little hazy. But as soon as we took off, it was like real heavy smoke, and I was thinking that same thing. I was like, man, I guess we got the instruments so we could fly in this dense smoke. And then you can hear all the traffic, and probably I'm hearing traffic from Coeur d'Alene, from Sandpoint, and maybe even picking up a little of the air traffic from Missoula. But it sounded really busy, and I'm like, oh man, we're gonna run another plane up here, because you couldn't see a thing. It was kind of spooky, so I just went back to my seat and just buckled in and just, was out of my hands at that point. So I just enjoyed the ride.
Things are, I mean, you still have to follow safety rules, but things are a lot different than they were, let's say, in the 50s and the 40s and all that, smoke jumpers and that sort of thing. Because now, the pilot usually always has an iPad, and they've got ForeFlight and some of those really cool aviation programs on them. And between their instruments and the data that's on this thing, they can tell exactly what their elevation is in relation to mountains or, any
Yeah.
of that stuff. There's just so many visual aids now. But still, you still have to worry about it because what if something goes wrong? The iPad is an electronic device,
Yep.
and battery could go dead theoretically, or something could just it decides it doesn't want to work
I
anymore.
was gonna say, well, all of us have been in the woods with the GPS. That was like even on our newer phone, and
Yeah,
it gets lagged, and then all of a sudden it
yeah,
catches up, and if it gets lagged out, and all of a sudden you're coming up on a big mountain range, that could be a real bad deal.
yeah, yeah. Really bad deal. So, yeah, for the air patrol plane, we were pretty on top of that, and all the pilots were really good about that stuff, and it's like, no, we can't see. I can see because I've got this, but that's not visual flight rules, and we need to go back.
Yeah, and it's not worth it, right?
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
What are we going to be effective? We probably aren't going to be able to find the fire because it's just so smoky.
Yeah.
And when it's that smoky, a lot of times the smoke will just like hang in certain drainages and stuff like that, and it looks like, oh, is that a wildfire? No.
Yeah, totally.
But
And actually, I was going to mention this earlier when we were talking about the effectiveness of lookouts. Like being able to be on top of a mountain and be able to stare into a canyon where you know a lightning strike hit because you saw it, and to be able to see and wait. Because you've been on, fires where the public calls it in. We go sit with the engine on a good vantage point, like a
yeah,
ridge or something or a hill, and you're staring right where the public said it was, and you'll see them maybe wisp, but you're like, is that a water dog? And then you sit there for a while, and then sometimes like it's getting dark, so you're like, well, I guess we'll come back tomorrow, and then you go PT and whatever else, and most of the time, in my experience, it end up being nothing. But with the lookout, you have that insurance to be like they're
yeah.
there all day, all night.
Sometimes Mark and Red, I believe, I can't remember what the fire was, but I believe they were still on Hills Half then. I'm sure they were still on Hills Half. They saw a wisp of smoke. It was in the wilderness. It was a holdover. They didn't see it for 20 days, 21 days, and it
Jeez.
popped up again.
Yeah, see, like stuff like that.
So,
Like, and not that we're, forgetful, but you get busy as a district and you're going to be doing other stuff and fighting other fire probably.
mm-hmm,
So that little wisp that went away, you're like,
mm-hmm,
must put itself out. And that's where it's going to be in the back of your brain. So
mm-hmm.
you're not going to be staring in that area of the woods, where a lookout
No,
will, you know?
they looked every day, but they never saw it. And then all of a sudden, like almost 3 weeks later, popped up in the exact same spot. So it was probably in duff, just percolating around, and just didn't reach the right temperature or whatever to take off, and then it did.
Yeah.
And then as I recall, it still didn't do much of anything, but nonetheless, that
Y-
can happen.
Yeah, totally. I was on a couple fires, and I know a few of my jumper bros, my buddies that I jumped with. They've been on fires too, where like you said, it was in like just a timber stand, and it was just duffing around, so no one saw anything, and then it finally like flared up a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
then it had enough heat to give some smoke,
Put
and then
up a little puff of smoke or something, and you
yeah,
could see it.
yeah, and you go jump it, and all of a sudden you're like walking around. There's a lot more black than you're dealing with because we've had 2-manners that were like, oh, this probably should have been a 4-manner, but you
Yeah.
can't tell from the air, and you get down there and there's a ton more burned country and some heavies that are just like simmering. You're like, oh, this is gonna take some work,
Yeah, yeah. So, the other thing, we're going to do something kind of special here in a minute, but you had mentioned to me that you're going to interview somebody.
Yeah, Larry Lufkin, Francis Lufkin's son. So Francis Lufkin was as I found out from his son, is the first, and he'll probably go in more in depth on this, but he's the first Forest Service employee to parachute out of a plane, and he was involved in the testing of the capability of
Smoke jumping.
Yeah, so the
So
testing to see if smoke jumping was gonna be viable.
He did jumps, but it wasn't a fire jump, so
No.
it was prior to the fire jump in 1940, which was actually just a few days ago
Oh yeah, it was,
in Moose Creek.
Yeah, Earl Cooley and Rufus.
Rufus Robinson.
Robinson, I think you're right.
Roberts.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think Rufus something.
Something like that.
Yeah, and which is
Yeah, it was
very
on
cool.
Moose Creek in, I can't remember the name of the drainage right now, but
can't either.
Martin Creek
Oh yeah,
out on Moose
you
Creek.
got a great memory, and I couldn't have recalled that. Yeah, so yes, before the actual first fire jump, and traditionally as a smoke jumper, you're not considered an actual smoke jumper until you get your first fire jump. So even if you make it through rookie training, you're just I think they call you like a rookie candidate or a smoke jumper candidate.
But as soon as you make the jump, you're official.
You're official. Yep. So that's why a lot of places like consider Missoula to be the first jump base because they got the very first actual fire jump.
Yeah.
And yeah, and there's something else I was gonna add to that, but I lost it. So, but anyways, Francis Lufkin was part of the trials for smoke jumping,
and this guy is his son that you're talking about.
Yep, and this guy's his son who also served in Vietnam, and yeah, so I'm gonna talk to him on Thursday, and really looking forward to that. And
didn't you say he was in 101st Airborne?
101st Airborne, yep. And and then there's also an iconic jumpsuit that I'd kind of seen, but I don't really know much about it. But in the podcast, Bill Moody, for folks who listen to that, Bill Moody talks about the red jumpsuit that was Francis Lufkin's, made for Francis Lufkin. So one of the first jumpsuits made out in Seattle. And after that, I'm not even sure when, but eventually all the jumpsuits and gear are made in-house and still are. All the jumpsuits are still made by each individual jump base.
That's cool.
Yeah, so like for some reason back then, I guess probably because it wasn't, we weren't sure if we're going to continue the program. So they got made out in Seattle somewhere in this red jumpsuit. And I think it was me and you talking that maybe that was the only color they had of material at the time. So
probably, yeah.
Ended up this red jumpsuit, and it survived. And Bill Moody jumped it in like the 80s or 90s. You'd have to refer to the podcast because I think it gives the exact date.
It'd be visible.
Yeah, it'd be visible. I was kind of surprised they didn't go with it, but maybe brown was cheaper. And but that jumpsuit, Bill Moody didn't know where it was, and so I talked to Larry Lufkin, who was in ownership of it for a while, and then he gave it to a museum, Evergreen Museum out near Olympia, Washington, and then some folks, it wasn't getting displayed, so some folks asked Larry if they could bring it to Missoula.
So they've still got it.
Yeah, so well now it's in Missoula, and so today actually after this podcast, me and the family are going to go to the mountain, was it Museum of Mountain Flying?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
they're at the airport.
Yep, it's supposed to be there, so I'm going to go time with those folks and go see if it is.
That'll be neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that kind of ties into what we're talking about.
So you're gonna talk to his son, and I'm sure some stuff will come up about Vietnam.
Yeah.
It usually does. And so that leads to what I brought with me today.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned in some of the earlier podcasts that one of my mentors in the fire world, well, there were a couple of them, more than a couple, but Jim Crockett, who started jumping in 1948, and he was the dispatcher at Sula and my boss when I started in 76. He was in charge of the lookouts at Sula. Yeah. And Jim had been in the Navy. When he was 17 years old, he joined the Navy. This was like toward the end of the war. And he went to Europe on a destroyer, I think.
Oh, really?
And like the day before they were supposed to arrive near the continent, Germany surrendered.
Oh.
And so they pulled into Hamburg or one of the German ports and refueled, went straight back to the United States. They didn't need them there.
Got a boat ride.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And everything was pretty much all decided on what units that were in Europe and what ships that were in the European waters were going to go to the Pacific for the upcoming invasion of Japan. Of course, this was before the two atomic bombs and all that stuff. Yeah. But they already had it pretty figured out who was going to go over there if Germany surrendered and there was no need for fighting in Europe anymore. So Jim wasn't even in the Navy like a whole year. They just let him out.
Oh, wow.
Because they had more people than they needed at that point, Yeah. And since he wasn't really experienced, I mean, he hadn't been in combat. His ship hadn't been attacked. He hadn't done anything, They let him out.
Oh, wow.
But he was a crackerjack firefighter. I mean, he was a logging kid and had been a jumper off and on and logged all those years and ran the Bitterroot IR crew, the third crew, 85, 6, in 65, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 70 out on Sula when the crew was out there at the guard camp.
Oh, yeah.
And then became the dispatcher, and that's why he was my boss. And then one of the guys that had worked for him on the IR crew in 69 and 70 after he got back from Vietnam was a guy named Walt Smith, local Hamilton kid. And Walt became one of my mentors in 1980. He'd been jumping since 1971 out of Missoula.
Oh,
Crockett recommended him to jump. And it's interesting when you look back through some of the old crew records and stuff that Cash digitized for me, that at the end of each fire season that Crockett ran the hotshot crew, he'd do ratings. And the people that he thought were really good, it said recommended for smoke jumper.
Oh, really?
And if Crockett recommended him, they picked him up.
Man.
Because he was that well thought of, Jim was, as a boss. And if he thought somebody was good enough to be a smoke jumper, then the jump base, Cooley was up there as the boss. Like, Crockett thinks he's good enough, I'll give him a chance.
Oh, cool.
Didn't mean that they were going to maybe make the training through all the training, but they at least got the chance, you know.
Probably good odds, though, because Crockett
Pretty
probably...
good odds, yeah. There weren't too many of them, I don't think, that washed out. And if they did, it was because of an injury or something and not because they couldn't do it, you know.
Yeah.
But Walt went up. Actually, Walt didn't jump in Missoula. He rookied in Boise because it was a Forest Service smoke jumper training base then.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
And then it became what, BLM.
Yeah, it's BLM
later
now,
on. But
yeah.
for those first few years that Walt worked out of there,
Oh, wow.
it was Forest Service. And so he was, 1971. So by the time he came down as our, he was kind of like a temporary assignment as a AFMO down there.
Oh.
Because they didn't really have that before then. It was just the dispatcher and the FMO. And then Forrest started realizing it'd be a good idea to have somebody else as an assistant, especially since dispatch was primarily going to be in Hamilton and not at each of the districts anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So Walt had gone to Vietnam. He graduated from Hamilton High School when he was 18. His birthday is in July. It's coming up here would have come up here in a couple of days. So he was 18 and went to Marine Corps boot camp in San Diego in June after he graduated from Hamilton High School.
Oh, yeah.
And by December, he was in Vietnam as an
Jeez.
infantryman. And I learned a lot about that later on in talking with him when he came to Sula, and we'd be out on the same fires or burns together. We never went on a fire together because Walt wasn't smoke chasing then. But we'd talk about stuff, and I was in the Navy, which my Navy experience was definitely not anything to do with combat. I mean, my world was different than Walt's, but Walt he'd really been through it, and he'd been shot. He'd had different things happen to him over there. And then every once in a while, the Smoke Jumper magazine, which is part of the National Smoke Jumper Association, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Does it come out every month or quarterly, or I don't really know, and I don't know that this.
I think it's monthly.
Oh, it says quarterly on the.
Quarterly.
Well, it says 2000 to present when I printed this off.
Maybe it is quarterly. I don't know.
So
I can't remember.
So that'd mean it'd come out 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And it has tons of historical stuff in it, interviews with, because it's been around for a long time, and interviews with some of the pioneer jumpers, and guys and or gals that are smoke jumpers can contribute articles. It's cool.
It is really cool.
And anybody can go on their home computer and Google National Smoke Jumper Association, and you can look at any of those magazines. There's jillions of them now.
Yeah.
And then kind of by accident, one year, I was looking for something else, and in one of the issues, I found this article titled "The First Time I Met Walt Smith." And it was written by a guy named Roger Cox. And after their names, if they were a smoke jumper, after their names in this publication, it'll have the name of the base and the year that they rookied. So this one said, the first time I met Walt Smith by Roger Cox, Missoula, 1969. And this was posted on 8/9/2020, so not that long
pretty
ago.
recent, yeah.
Yeah. So Roger Cox rookied in Missoula in 1969, and Walt rookied in Boise in 71. So Walt came along a couple of years later.
Yeah.
But this is kind of a Vietnam story, but a lot of guys that jumped in the late 60s and early 70s, not all, but a lot of guys had been in the service, different branches of the service, Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, whatever.
Yeah.
And Roger Cox wrote this article, and it's kind of lengthy, but it's super interesting. And for people that might not know a real lot about Vietnam, there were parts of that war that were the real deal. I mean, they were as real of a deal as World War II or Korea or anything else. I mean, really intense combat.
Yeah.
And I'd like to read this.
Yeah.
And I didn't try and get a hold of Roger Cox because I have no idea how to do it, to ask him if he's okay if I read this, but I think he would be.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I'm going to read it to you guys, and then that's probably about all we're going to do because you got stuff to do, but I would like to share this with people. So Roger Cox wrote this, and he says, he starts out, it was July 5th, 1975, and we were in the Twin Otter circling the McKnight Fire on the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. The fire was small, as most were in the area of the historic McKnight burn that covered thousands of acres years before. I knew that cat's claw and oak brush awaited us on the ground. It was early morning, and the wind was calm as usual early in the day. It would pick up by midday, but this fire did not seem to be a threat. A single snag smoking near the base with perhaps a little ground fire, a product of last night's lightning show. It was my 6th season of jumping, my 3rd in Region 3. This looked to be as easy as they get. I couldn't ask for a better jump partner. Walt Smith, Boise, 1971, was new to R3, but not new to jumping, and was as dependable and capable as any jumper I knew. The fire was going to be routine, no surprises there. The spotter called for 2, and Walt and I waddled to the door, soon to be under a T-10, looking for a landing spot in the scattered timber near the fire. Walt did his rookie training at Boise, and after a few years had transferred to Missoula. He had gone to school in Hamilton, Montana, started on the football team as a linebacker, and I suspect a good one. When Walt transferred in, I was helping with training of new jumpers. This is in Missoula. One of the items that Walt had not trained in was water landing. Bernie Hildy, Missoula, 1969, that guy was a legend in his own right, too. Mm-hmm. I met him. Bernie Hildy and I loaded up a truck and, with several other jumpers, drove to the French Tround Pond, where we demonstrated the process of landing in water and getting yourself plus your main chute to shore. It was my first contact with Walt that I could remember. Walt had served in the Marine Corps and had done time in Vietnam as a grunt, as I had. That I knew, and it interested me, but we never had discussed our experiences. Maybe it was too recent. Only 8 years earlier, we were living the dream in Vietnam, and as usual, we really didn't ever discuss our experiences. No good reason, it was just the way it was. I had noticed that Walt had checked the NSA website, some of the habits that combat creates. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but
yeah, I wonder, just doing some research maybe.
Yeah, probably. And then he says, Walt didn't like people. Hang on.
Oh yeah.
Walt
Walt didn't like people being behind him and would keep track by standing so that the sun would cast a shadow if someone walked behind him. He also put his back to the wall or sat with his back to the wall so that he had total control of the area in front of him. I did the same thing and still do, but it wasn't worth commenting on, and I never brought up the subject. That was because of combat experiences.
Yeah.
The fire was routine, and we had it controlled very quickly. Digging was easy, and the line went in without challenge. Then we broke out the crosscut saw and dropped the snag. It shattered when it hit the ground, so we had some mopping up to do. That took a while, and we worked quietly, just doing our job. By evening, the fire was cold, and we would be spending the night with a promised helicopter pickup the next morning. Time to break out the hot dogs and enjoy the evening. I'm not sure who brought this subject up first, but Vietnam became the subject, and the story was just starting. February 27, 1967, and this is not Walt, this is the other guy, I was dug in with my company north of Highway 9, just south of the DMZ in I Corps sector of Vietnam. My unit was Lima Company of 3rd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiment. I was a rifleman, the basis for the Marine Corps. My time in Vietnam had just started, and I was not yet a combat-hardened Marine. I had done little more than march days and dig in every night with the other 140 men in my company. Remember that 140 is a key thing here.
Oh.
The regiment had been in country for over a year, and my company was filled with Marines with combat experience. The night, this is February 27th, 67, the night started out like every other night: establish a perimeter and dig a fighting hole, heat a can of sea rations, try to get some sleep before your first watch. This part of the process I had figured out, but I wasn't expecting to be awakened at dark 30 and march the rest of the night to who knows what. A recon unit, usually 6 to 8 Marines, had made contact the day before with what turned out to be an entire regiment of NVA, North Vietnamese Army troops. From the after action report published by the Marine Corps, that's where he got this information about that it was a regiment.
Oh.
The morning of the 27th, a Marine reconnaissance team 5,000 meters northwest of Cam Lo attempted to ambush what appeared to be only 2 enemy soldiers. This team actually engaged an enemy company. A company is a couple of hundred men, which proved to be the lead element of the 812th Regiment, 324th B Division of the North Vietnamese Army. By 10:25 in the morning, the recon team reported that they were surrounded by at least 100 NVA. The closest friendly force was Captain Alan Hartney's Company L, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marine, which was this guy's company. They were on the run, the recon team. They were on the run with wounded and needed help. We were the closest unit and were directed to immediately make our way to their assistance. This was an unusual request, for we never moved at night except for listening posts and ambushes pre-planned and requiring travel only over a very short distance. I don't remember much about the march. It was darker than the inside of a cow, and we never used any illumination for fear of giving our position away. Travel was quite quiet, shuffling several hours as we made our way south down a road that was little more than a 2-wheel track. I just kept track of the man ahead of me as I felt my way down the trail. By first light, we had arrived at our destination, now having been joined by tanks. Their firepower is appreciated, but it means that we did not arrive unnoticed. Tanks are not quiet. With the rising sun, we left the trail and climbed a small ridgeline, soon to be noted as Hill 124. At that point, we were 8 miles or more from saltwater, so it was not a major climb. As we were spreading out, my platoon was ordered to advance across the small saddle and secure it as a landing zone. My squad was advancing across this area when the first mortar rounds were fired by the NVA. Those sounds of dropping in the tube are a sure sign of a bad day off to a bad start. This started the artillery barrage that would continue nonstop for the next 3 days.
Oh.
The 82 millimeter mortars were not just random, and the first round landed in our proposed LZ, landing zone for helicopters. One of my squad members was killed with the first round, and another Marine was badly wounded. As our platoon commander directed, we quickly set up a perimeter and prepared to dig in as the mortar barrage picked up in intensity. Chaos prevailed for minutes until we got lined out and the company prepared to defend itself. So far, we were only taking mortar rounds. Rifle fire was yet to come, but it did. I was paired up with an experienced Marine, and I followed his lead. His courage and calmness were infectious. Our first action was defend ourselves while hoping to get a foxhole dug for protection. Off to my left was a tank reinforcing our perimeter and bringing tremendous firepower to our line. As the battle built in intensity, I was occupied with firing into my assigned sector as targets appeared and digging like hell to get us below the incoming fire. I kept my rifle hot. Although I had experienced some action in my brief time in Vietnam, I had not endured a major battle as this one had just become. The noise was overwhelming with our return fire and the tank's guns. We were realizing we were in contact with a superior force and were fighting for our lives. Rifle, machine gun, and mortar fire was now joined by rocket-propelled grenades.
Ooh.
Their first objective was to get the tank. In short, the tank received multiple hits and was burning. A Marine crawled out of the hatch and leaned up against the turret. He was obviously still alive, but with all the rounds hitting the tank was in mortal danger. My foxhole mate, Fred Lopez, says, "I can't watch this," and jumps up, running to the tank. He made it through the hail of bullets and mortars and was trying to pull the Marine off the tank. I jumped up to assist, but Fred was able to move him behind the tank before I arrived. Fred was recommended for the Silver Star for this action. In my absence, our foxhole took a direct hit from a mortar round, the fortunes of war. We returned to our position and took up the fight again. The remaining afternoon, we were in constant contact. The NVA did pull back, but the shelling never stopped. As the day wore on, we were resupplied with ammunition from our wounded and dead and prepared for a long night, not knowing what to expect, but expecting the worst. The M14 is a reliable rifle, and I continued to monitor my sector, occasionally firing with or without targets just to keep them honest. Staff Sergeant Boyer, our platoon sergeant, made the rounds, checking our position, water, and ammo. He mentioned that we might pull back and consolidate our perimeter to adjust for our losses. We are now being supported from every direction. The surrounding Marine fire bases were making the night miserable for the NVA. So was illumination. The star shell, or flares, would give us several minutes of light, then another star shell was on its way. This support was probably keeping us alive. The company had some badly wounded Marines, men that wouldn't make it till daylight. Sometime during the night, a dust-off, which is a helicopter, came into our perimeter, and again, if called, they came. They, referring to those pilots who did the impossible daily. Our LZ was designated as hot, referring to the fact that any incoming helicopters would be under intense fire. A flashlight was placed in the bottom of a hole on the landing zone. Only the helicopters could see it. They hovered over it and dropped straight down. The only visible sign was the glow of the exhaust pipe on the helicopter. The NVA could hear the operation, and by sound alone, the night was filled with green tracers. That, in turn, gave us targets on the perimeter. The extraction was a success, thanks to the courage of those pilots to do the impossible. At dawn, they came, the North Vietnamese. At first, shelling increased, then the probing of our lines started. For several hours, the situation was in doubt. At 0630, a vicious mortar and infantry track stunned our Company L. More than 150 82 millimeter mortar rounds hit the company position, and the NVA forces struck from three sides with heavy automatic weapons, small arms, and anti-tank fire. By 0900, the Marines had repulsed three enemy attacks. Captain Hartney and his artillery observer called in the artillery fire to within 30 meters of our company's position. So that's like 90 feet, something like that.
That's real close, yeah.
Called in mortar fire on our company's position. I got to flip pages here.
Oh, yeah.
Incoming rounds were continuous. So was the support from nearby Camp Carroll, which was a Marine fire base. The NVA reaction to this was to get as close as possible to our lines, danger close as the term for fire support requests for shelling so close to our positions. The situation was still in doubt. Then it says, back on the Gila. I inquired about the nature and circumstances of Walt's Purple Heart. That can be a forbidden question, but among Marine veterans, it is acceptable. His story revealed the first time I met Walt Smith. Walt said his battalion was stationed at Camp Carroll, soon to be en route for a new operation area in a place called Quezon, which became incredibly well known because of the siege later on. Walt's company was reassigned to an urgent request for reinforcements. There was little information as to the nature of the assignment, but that was not unusual. Walt had been in country for some time and had combat experience. His company was dropped off on Highway 9 directly south of Hill 124, a few clicks off the road. So they were coming to try and rescue this guy's folks that were in this big battle with the NVA. Walt's fire team, composed of 4 Marines, was assigned the point position. Walt said they could hear the battle, so there was no illusion of what lay ahead. They traveled a well-used trail that appeared to give access to the battle scene. The NVA were expecting them. Walt noticed that the trail had been prepped with mortars, meaning it had been zeroed in anticipation of Marine reinforcements. Walt was the 4th in line. As the point element slowly approached the area, Walt detected movement off the trail. Before he could react, gunfire swept the point, killing the other 3 Marines and wounding Walt. He crawled and scrambled his way back to the column in a hail of fire. The officer in charge told him to hold his position and they would fight their way up to them. Walt said that he was the only survival and he had been shot multiple times. So what Roger didn't describe was that Walt told Tommy Thompson and I when we first learned about this event that so he and his other 3 companions were the head of the Marines that they were leading in. And when they got to this area where they were actually fired upon, they came into an opening and there were still cooking fires with rice cooking in little tin pots that had been abandoned. Ooh. And the second they saw that, Walt said, we knew we were in trouble because they had just run away from where they were eating to get into fighting positions and attack us. And then those volleys that came and killed the other 3 and wounded Walt were from those guys. Jeez. Okay, so as the point element slowly approached the area, Walt detected a movement. The 3 Marines were killed. He was wounded. He scrambled back. As the firefight developed, more Marines were wounded, and Walt was placed in a bamboo grove with the other wounded. Before long, the NVA had surrounded Golf Company, and Walt asked to have his rifle back. as the NVA were trying to break through the bamboo. When they climbed up on the bamboo to gain access, they were easy targets. Walt was firing with his right hand only. He had multiple bullet wounds in his left arm and shoulder. Walt's company, Golf Company, continued to advance and fought their way to Lima, Rogers' folks' perimeter, where they created a corridor that the dead and wounded could be carried through. At 10:35 on the morning of the 28th, Company G began to moving up the hill and came under fire from well-concealed positions on both flanks. The fighting was heavy, casualties mounted on both sides. Among the Marine dead was Company G's commander, Captain Bockwitz, who later received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his efforts. The tank was now a burned-out hulk. The Marine who Corporal Lopez had assisted getting off the tank died of his burns. The tank served no purpose in defense, but could be used for protection from incoming mortar rounds. By digging out under the tank and closing the forward opening with dirt, we created a mortar-proof bunker. As the wounded Gulf Marines entered our perimeter, some were directed to our bunker underneath the tank. Walt said that he had lost too much blood and wasn't stable. The Lima Marines formed a line and passed the wounded from Walt's company into the space under the tank. I did not know which one was Walt. The war was still going on and the mood was tense. Very little was said. No Marine complained. We finished putting the wounded under the tank and hurried back to our positions. Lima Company, this is Rogers' company, had more than 100 casualties by this time out of 140 original Marines in that company.
100 casualties, you said?
100. The enemy closed within 20 meters and attacked with small arms and grenades. The Marines returned fire and forced the enemy to withdraw. At this time, the helicopters arrived to pick up wounded, but were unable to land because of heavy fire in the landing zone. Other Marine units had joined the fight for a total of 5 other companies in contact with this NVA regiment. That still gave the NVA a 3-to-1 advantage in manpower. We were on the defensive and the objective was to break contact. That was not to happen very easily. All radios had been hit and casualties continued to mount. Moving the dead and wounded out of the killing zone required feats of bravery beyond comprehension. The NVA were everywhere. Lieutenant Colonel O'Hanson, battalion commander, was carrying the last of the wounded Marines toward the perimeter when an explosion mortally wounded him. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously also. The battle drew more and more resources until the NVA and their normal practice had begun to withdraw. They knew at some point that power could be brought to bear which would overwhelm them. As they broke contact and retreated north, the Marines picked up their dead and wounded and withdrew to the south. The battle for Hill 124 had ended. Walt was sent to the Repose, a hospital ship that was stationed offshore. While there, the commandant of the Marine Corps, General Lew Walt, decorated him. That's when he got his Purple Heart. My battalion was sent to Okinawa to rest, recover, and receive reinforcements. There were only 40 of us of the original 140 left. I had 8 more months and many more battles to endure before my 3rd wound would send me home. And then the afterthought. We were both amazed that Walt and I had made contact in Vietnam. Of course, we had no idea that smoke jumping was in our future and that we would meet again. But the mere facts of our meeting had to be unique, or we would have never realized our meeting. We both made passing contact with many Marines that we would never recognize if we met them later in life. The fact that that burned-out tank was used as a bunker was very unusual. I never saw it happen again, nor would Walt be wounded and placed under a burned-out tank ever again. When he mentioned the tank, I knew instantly he was one of those Marines that I helped out. This discussion triggered memories we usually don't want to recall. The conversation slows and then drifts to silence. We slept on the ground that night, just as we had 8 years earlier, only no green tracers to fill the night sky to entertain us. We got to take off our boots and not worry about taking the 0130 to 0300 watch. We were back in the world. Welcome home.
Man. What a story. Holy cow, man.
Man. You know, and
What an experience.
Walt talked to us, you know, a lot about that later on because we were fire buddies of his, you know, and yeah, and then Walt retired when he turned 50 at Sula in 97. We had a chromed Pulaski head made for him.
Oh, nice.
And he had a brand new baby daughter shortly after that, and took a trip to Mexico, a long trip with he and his wife, and the little daughter, and two friends of ours, Joe Thompson and his girlfriend Mary Byers. Joe was on the hot chocolate with me a bit later on, also.
Oh, yeah.
And then, in '99, Walt had a brain tumor, and he died in the end of January in 2000. So he was only 52, 53 years old.
It's too young.
Yeah, it's it's not fair. I can't even hardly talk about it to this day. He was. I mean, I called him on the phone a lot for advice about things with crew dynamics and stuff like that, and he was always willing to help us out because he had the hot shot crew in his experience also prior to me. But he's just, that's the way he was. He was one of those guys that through his fire career, and I heard this from a lot of the jumpers because we knew tons of those guys and gals because we'd end up on the same fires. Sometimes we would relieve them, or I'd have a fire out on West Fork or something, and a bunch of those jumpers would come in, and they'd always say that Walt was the one that he always led from the front. He wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. And when he could, even if he was the IC of a fire, he'd be right there helping them set up a Mark III or do whatever.
Man, that's the best leader right there. Goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, and his legacy's still there. There's still a lot of folks around that are retired jumpers here in the valley, and other firefighters from the districts that knew that guy. And he was a real deal.
Yeah, I wish I would have got to meet him. And I mean, that was one of the big motivations for me to start this podcast, especially when I first talked to you, was the sharing the memory of someone, like Walt Smith, who was an incredible human. And, like locally, people still remember him, but, his story probably isn't out there, except for, if someone read that article, it probably isn't out there as much as I think it should be, and so for you sharing that story, I'm very thankful, Rene. Thanks for taking time.
It's pretty incredible. I had other friends that were in Vietnam, and
yeah,
they had similar stories. One of my friends, Linda Kennedy, moved up to Montana the year after I did, kind of because of my describing how cool it was to my mom.
Yeah.
My mom was a career beauty operator and owned her own shop, and Linda had worked for her for a lot of years. And she and her husband, Ed, moved up here. And Linda's cousin came up to visit. He had been in Vietnam in the Army, and I don't recall what outfit he was in, but he had been in heavy combat. And they had a huge firefight, and this guy, Ron was his first name, had been shot apparently and rendered unconscious.
Oh, man.
And this is him telling the story like in 1975 here in Montana to me when he came up to visit Ed and Linda, he and his wife.
Yeah.
And he woke up, he came out of being unconscious in a sling net under about 45 dead guys' bodies from his company
Whoa.
being hauled off in a helicopter, being ready to be hauled off in a helicopter. And he realized what was happening. He started screaming that I'm alive, get me the hell out of here,
Yeah.
And they had the helicopter drop the net because it was safe to do so. There were no NVA around or whatever, or Viet Cong. And they got him out of the net. And Ron was so freaked out by the whole thing that he told his company commander, he said, "That's it, man. I'm done. I want out of this place. I don't care if you send me to prison. I don't care what you do. I'm done. I will not fight another day."
Oh, I don't blame him.
And they ended up not doing anything to him. They let him out because it was like, "I don't care what you do to me. I'm done. I've had it. I've had enough of this shit. I'm not doing it."
Yeah, you're in the death net, like.
Yeah. So I mean, there were tons of stories like that, and
Such a brutal war.
failed marriages. I mean, people coming home, PTSD and different stuff. I think the unpopularity of the war had a lot to do with it too, because they knew what was going on back home with, the riots and demonstrations and people refusing the draft for their own reasons and whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just like, here you are, you're over there thinking you're doing what your country wants you to do, and then
Soldiers are getting spit on coming home.
The ultimate that we found out years later was that the whole thing was just part of a plan to deny the communists more small countries surrounding their territory,
Yeah.
and that these guys were sacrificed basically for nothing.
Yeah.
That's the sucky part.
Yeah.
But anyway, I appreciate people listening to that because I think it's an important story, and it's about two fellow firefighters, and guys that experienced some pretty crappy stuff before they made it into the smoke jumper and hotshot world.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing.
And I think we've talked about this before about how people who have similar likes or similar interests in life, it brings us all together, and I think that's why it ends up being such a big family. You go on a fire with somebody you've never met before, and you're hitting it off like your best friends, and you're able to go work together, the communication's tight, and you're able to go, help put out a fire without ever knowing each other previously. And then that shows you, these two fellows who were in the same battle, almost lost their lives, in the same battle, and all sitting there on a fire in the middle of nowhere, Montana, together.
You're on a fire in the middle of nowhere, meeting somebody the first time, and you find out they know or have been on fires with people that you know.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, all these years, and still, this still happens to me, even though almost everything I do is as a volunteer nowadays, with the lookouts. But I did get to do that 2 years ago, that delivering fuel out on West Fork, and I got to hang out with a lot of the firefighters from West Fork and other places. But it's just like, it's just this huge circle that goes around, that we end up being with new people who know people that we knew who we'd never think that they knew them.
Yeah, totally. And there's so many layers, right? So you got your hotshot family, so you got that connection, and that's still strong as ever, like you said, with Cash and all that, and then just regular, kind of more type 2 work because you did district stuff, and then your lookout stuff, I'm talking to a fellow named Rick who's down, I think he's in Colorado area, and I'll have to ask him, but and he's talking to me about Leaf, and then Leaf and all this, it's really cool, man, the network.
Yeah, folks, that's the cool part about this job. Those that have done it for a long time or even not so long, is that it's really special.
It is really special.
Really special. I've never regretted for a minute. When I got to Montana, I had no idea whatsoever what I was going to end up doing.
Yeah.
And just the luck of getting to go to Medicine Point 2 years later in '76 at Sula started this whole amazing adventure, which is really still going on.
I was going to say, you're still building, which is very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thanks again, Rene. I really appreciate you coming out, and especially on such short notice.
Yeah, no, glad to do it. I always love talking to you, and it's always good. So
yeah, vice versa. And thanks for everybody for tuning in and listening.